Welcome to Cake on Tuesday, where we spotlight the rule breakers, the underdogs who refuse to listen when everyone said it won't work. I'm Elizabeth Bieniek, and for the next 20 minutes, we're diving into another disruptive innovation story that proves sometimes the craziest ideas change everything. Today's guest is Michele Bonds, a sculptural paper artist who builds works of art from layered sheets of paper carved by hand. Michele's background comes from 2 decades of working inside highly structured professional environments on Wall Street and in an executive search where precision, discipline, and clarity were the baseline. Those years shaped how she reads systems, how she understands pressure, and how she now interprets the literal layers of underlying structures and brings that to her work. So I heard this structural paper artist and I was like, I have to have you on the show, Michele. Michele, welcome to Cake on Tuesday.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So I want to dig into this. You might have to first explain a little bit about what a structural paper artist is, because I didn't know until I looked at your work and saw this is amazing. So explain a little bit about what that is and a little bit about what sets your soul on fire about what you do now.
Well, I take paper and I adhere it in layers anywhere between 10 and 100 layers usually. And then I cut and I carve and I scrape into the layers to reveal the topography underneath. In a way, it's like excavation. And what sets me on fire about what I do is such a great question. I get to have it all now. I get to have it all. When I lived worked in corporate America, it did feel like I lived there, actually. I worked quite a bit. I worked at a top law firm on Wall Street, and then I worked at one of the top 5 executive recruiting firms, and I really liked what I did, but I never felt complete. And now that I'm a full-time artist, I get to have my cake and eat it too. I get to create artwork and do something that I truly love, but I also get to be an entrepreneur. And as a former intrapreneur, it's been very interesting transitioning from an intrapreneurship to an entrepreneurship type of life. It's very different, and I'm loving every second of it, but I am very challenged every single day, and I'm really pushed to the edges of my capabilities. And it's pretty exciting.
That's really cool. Okay, so we're both Babson Beaver alums here. We met through that connection, which I love. And Babson's very big on the entrepreneurial spirit, whether you're applying that entrepreneurial or intrapreneurially. With that in mind, you took that entrepreneurial background and disrupted yourself. You were doing one career path and then decided to be entrepreneurial in an entirely different career path. Can you talk a little bit about that change and that disruption within?
Well, it really started in 2020, I would say, when COVID was impacting all of us. I realized that I wasn't realizing my full potential and that I really wanted to. And I'd always thought that I would support entrepreneurs or be in some entrepreneurial environment, but I kept picking these very established industries and environments. And then I started to think, well, maybe I should do something else. And I started making artwork and immediately knew that was what I wanted to do. And then all of my voices and the voices of people who knew me piped in and said, that's a terrible career path. Why would you do that? You can't make any money at it. It's very difficult to be successful, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized I had the Babson toolkit. I also had my decades of experience in corporate environments and making changes within those spaces and being innovative in those spaces. I thought, well, I'm going to give this a try and I'm going to see how it goes. So half my day, again, I spend making art, and half of my day I spend building my business. And it is a blast. I'm having the absolute best time. But the transition wasn't easy. It was very challenging to do, mostly because I had to change so much of my mindset. Babson really promotes ETA, entrepreneurial thought in action. And it sounds great theoretically, and it's intellectually very satisfying. But your nervous system has to catch up to the risk profile that you now occupy as an entrepreneur. It's very, very different.
Absolutely. And it's very, very scary going through that. I've talked to a lot of business owners who have made major transitions, and they always talk about the mental side of it is we focus so much coming from a business background on the numbers and the logical shift, if you will. But it's such a mental journey and a mental game to really identify in this new path and this new thing that you're doing. So I'm kind of fascinated by the whole process for you. I do want to dig a little bit though into you're at this really interesting spot of an intersection of art and business. Not only are you going back and forth as an entrepreneur yourself, but also the artwork that you create, you've really focused on how important complex three-dimensional art is to the brain and how we view and process that and how that impacts us. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's very interesting to engage with art after being in corporate structures and really optimizing my career for operations. It's very helpful with what I do now because if you have a process where you're making something, that really is a support for that. When you're going into 3 dimensions, it takes your brain out of linear thinking and moving down a path and having an A or a B option or A or a B or a C option. 3 dimensions just takes it into a completely different way of thinking. When I started working in 3 dimensions, it just felt very natural to me to do that. But articulating that to other people and having conversations with people about the value that that might bring to them was much more of a challenge than making the work itself. And I mean that both from just a pure creative conversation angle and also a value angle. So I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question quite yet, but that is a good background for that conversation. Being able to think in 3 dimensions is something that many people aspire to, and I'm hearing more conversation now about how AI is gonna push us out of being in kind of an automated world where we are all just pushing different parts of the cog along to really creating a space for people to be active thinkers and really expand their minds. So this work that I create is very intuitive for me to create, but I'm finding people who like to use their mind to think in really complex ways are very attracted to it. To me, art is a mirror. So when you look at a piece of art, it's and you have a response to it, it's reflecting something back to you that already exists. It's a lot, as particularly with abstract art, which is the type of art I make. It's almost like looking at a cloud moving in the sky, and everybody's seeing similar things, but different people are seeing different things, and it's inspiring to have different types of thoughts. So I find that the artists that I was inspired by and attracted to had this not necessarily a physical three-dimensional elements. Some of them did, but they had visual three-dimensional elements because I enjoy engaging in that way. And what I've seen in the brain science with regard to engaging with three-dimensional artwork in particular is that it can cause your mind to expand its thinking beyond whatever rut you might be thinking rut you might be in. So most of the brain science I've observed about art and the way that it can be used in corporate environments supports that when you are wanting to move into creative thinking, looking at something creative, some kind of art object, something that's not necessarily perfectly symmetrical, can help your brain, different parts of your brain fire and get you more into creative thinking. So I wanted to start speaking more about that because it's pretty incredible how effective that is.
Right. Yeah, that's really fascinating because I think a lot of us intuitively know that. We know when we look at a beautiful painting or sculpture or we listen to an amazing piece of music that it does get you out of your rut. You start thinking differently, you start approaching things differently. But the science behind that, other than just a gut feel, I'm not that familiar with what the science behind that. And I know there is science behind that. There's been studies on that. I think that's kind of fascinating. You're bringing up a really good point, though, of a lot of people that are in a creative field, especially one that appeals to the business world, where I think a lot of your artwork would. You have to translate your message into the lingo of the industry in which you are now operating and selling in. What about that translation process has been surprising, either good or bad?
That's a great question. In my corporate life, I learned to speak in very direct, clear ways. I worked in very high pressure environments, particularly when I was working in law. I had a front row seat for a lot of the events of 2008 because of what I was doing at the time. And being really efficient and direct with your communication is highly valued in those environments. When it comes to communicating with art, it's more about abstract thought versus, very clear, you can do this or you can do that or you can do this. It's much more broad. And also, art is really in the eye of the beholder, truly what it means and what it inspires in someone. And it can be extremely personal. I've come to the conclusion that talking about the meaning that art brings into people's lives is really valuable. And there's a similarity there in corporate. Of course, speaking to value is something that's really important, but the value of art is very different from a manufactured product. Art isn't terribly scalable. So that's, a lot of the business conversation, especially entrepreneurship, is about scaling and making it more available to more people physically. Art doesn't work like that. So there were some really interesting adjustments that I have been going through and I continue to iterate on with regard to speaking about art. One of the things that I found really interesting about the art business side, this was so fascinating to me. It is an unregulated market, completely unregulated market. And I came from financial services and
The
law.
other extreme of regulation.
Yes, that was my primary background, is in those spaces. So coming to the art world where value is spoken about in a different way and the market is again unregulated, and so it's a bit of a free-for-all. There's not clear pathing for artists to be successful. There's an implied clear path, but it's not really well defined. The industry is going through massive disruption and disintermediation at the same time. It's been a really interesting environment to maneuver through and to look to see where I can add value and in what way I can do that has been a fascinating process and question to engage with as I'm moving through, my
Yeah.
career. It's a really, really interesting space, particularly from an entrepreneurial angle. Not too many, I don't know of too many entrepreneurs that get to have this, like, blank canvas that I do in a space that's in this disruption and disintermediation. And there's a change happening because the industry didn't really adopt terribly quickly to technological change. It feels a lot like what we've observed with media and how media has been going through some heavy evolutions over the last, I would say, 15 or 20 years because of technology. We're still seeing a lot of that play out. Art is a little bit late to that party, but it creates interesting opportunities as well. Artists can be self-represented now because of social media, because you can go direct to the people that collect your work.
Right.
You have a real meaningful relationship with them and have really direct conversations with them. And I'm finding as I continue down this path, people are interested in getting to know me and my mind and how I think about things instead of having someone between them and the artist. So treating art like an object versus treating art like a carrier of meaning is a shift that I'm starting to see happen. And that might be because that's how I'm choosing to engage.
Hmm.
But it's a fascinating space.
Yeah, you mentioned technology and the usage of it now. You mentioned earlier AI. How do you see that playing out in your field? Because I know there's been specifically around the art world, there's been a lot of reactions on all extremes around AI is eating the world, art is dead, and other people look at it as AI is a fantastic tool and co-collaborator for creation. What is your take on that, and how do you see that impacting your field?
I feel that AI is a really wonderful tool. I use it in my own business for a lot of different parts of the admin and operations side of what I do with my work. I don't use it to create my artwork because my work can't be made by an AI. It's not a digital, it's not
Yeah.
digital at all. So I heard Simon Sinek say recently that in a world where you can get a perfect mug mass manufactured, the thing that becomes really truly valuable is that handmade imperfect object, that wabi sabi thing starts to go, the masterfully made thing that isn't something that's easily replicated. That's the space that I live in, and that's what I speak to a lot when I speak to people about my work. This is one of a kind, and it's handmade, and it comes from the aggregation of the experiences and the thoughts that I have communicated through my hands into this object. So that, I think, is where value is going to increase, is in those masterfully made, beautifully executed objects that hold meaning for people.
Hmm. I like that. The combination of uniqueness, imperfection, and authenticity all come together in something different that is really, truly one of a kind. That is fascinating.
Not everything can be automated.
Yeah. And that's what makes it special sometimes.
Mhm. Yes.
So, what are you most excited about next for you, for your business, for the art world?
I'm very excited for artists to take on the opportunity to really speak more publicly about their artwork and about their ideas. I think that artists really play a unique role in our society as, not so much the outsider rebels, even though there is some element of that as artists, but as a reflection of the time that we live in, a reflection of our values, and a reflection of meaning. I think that that's a really important role. And artists can be real thought leaders and partners in a world where automation is expanding so much and creative thinking is something that we will hold as a higher value. I lived and worked in a lot of different environments where they say, oh, creativity is so important and we really want to support that. But then the culture will value consistency and automation over creativity. Creativity is naturally a disruptive activity.
Right.
There's no way around that. But I saw a quote from Stephen Hawking recently, which I'm going to butcher, but I will still put it out here.
Paraphrase, that's okay.
Yes, where he said that chaos is essential. Without chaos, none of us would exist. It's a very important part of life. And we really have over-indexed quite a bit on the order part, and AI is going to step in and take over a lot of that order part. But I'm still, and it can create things, sure, but it lacks human discernment.
Hmm. So, how do you define success for yourself in this next chapter?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel successful every day.
That's awesome.
I feel successful every day. Well, because I get to get up and I work more than I did now. I work more now than I did
I'm
when I was
sure.
Wall Street. And it's pretty crazy to think about that because I worked a lot when I worked in law. I worked a lot. But I work more now than ever before, but it doesn't And there is a work element to it. You never get away from feeling that way. But my work is so deeply, profoundly meaningful to me, both when I'm creating the work and when I'm working on the business side of my business. Both parts of that are profoundly creative to me. That is what was so interesting about this shift for me. I always thought that art was more creative. Entrepreneurship is extremely creative. You are constantly having to be present in both. You have to constantly adjust in both. My artwork is abstract, so there's no, oh, it looks like a face enough now that I can stop. There's none of that. It's the opposite of the level of precision that I worked in when I was working in corporate environments that were necessary for me to be optimizing in those roles. And now it's like no rules. Everything is completely up to me. And it's a lot of freedom. Entrepreneurship, what's been shocking about it to me is how much freedom I have and really understanding how to live with that. Because you come from a structured environment where you've got healthcare and you've got this, and you got to be here at a certain time and you leave at a certain time and the deal is done and then you celebrate and etc. And there's none of that now in
Right.
life. So I decide when it's a win. I decide when it's time to eat cake on Tuesday. I decide maybe I have my cake on Saturday. Maybe I
That's
have
okay
it.
too.
Yeah. But I'm the boss. It's entirely up to me. What happens or what doesn't happen, and what's a win and what isn't a win, and what's success and what it isn't. So I decide that every day. And I've gotten to a place in my life with this process where every waking up and getting to do this another day is a wild success to me. And I celebrate that every morning when I'm getting going.
That's fantastic. Michele, if people want to follow on that journey, if they want to learn more about you, find your artwork, where should they go?
They should check out my website, which is michelebonds.com. It's Michele with one L. I've got a couple of shows coming up. In March, I'll be in San Francisco at the Super Fair, and I'll also be at the Super Fair this April in New York. And I would love to meet like-minded people. That's one of the greatest things, again, about being an entrepreneur is you have this opportunity to meet lots of interesting people who have lots of interesting minds and interesting things to say.
Excellent. Michele, thank you so much for joining us on Cake on Tuesday.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks for joining another Cake on Tuesday celebration of beautiful disruption. Please share it, review it, and find more innovative stories at podcast.cakeontuesday.com. I'm Elizabeth Bienyik. Be bold, stay curious. Now go have some cake.